in business, there's the idea of first mover advantage, and that's fine if you want to dominate a market. Starmer could have waited.
Yes, he could.
Because being small, he doesn't have that option of dominating the world, so he should have waited. There are plenty of excuses politicians can use. Perhaps he could have said, I'm chatting to Morgan McSweeney about what I should do.
And this is not a morning for flippancy, Peter. I need more substantive suggestions of what he could have done differently, because I can't personally think of many. So you can see it as a protection payment to a mob boss, much more than a liberalising agreement between sovereign countries. But it is nonetheless an agreement that puts us in a much better position than we were in yesterday.
Well, perhaps the Morgan McSweeney thing is overly harsh. He could have simply said, we're rather tied up at the moment. He accepted the proposal, because I agree with you. It's the best he could achieve.
Yes.
The deal is very, very thin indeed. It covers nothing and will unravel. I mean, 2 days before, he was talking about 100,000% tariffs on films, 100%.
100%. And then yesterday he was saying that he wasn't, and that James Bond was safe. So
you can applaud it for being pragmatic.
Yes.
But and also not really worth the Sharpie that signed it. But nonetheless, I think being second would have been, or later, would have been wiser than being first. And the reason he's first is the reason you've explained, that he's desperate. We're in a fire sale because of Brexit, so we need to look like we're doing something.
So I'm not quite clear on what you're saying. So I mean, if he'd waited, I don't think he would have got anything better, because he's got no more leverage, unless he'd actually threatened to take the state visit off the table, and maybe he did, but it seems unlikely. We are not big enough. Exactly. I think we're 3% of US trade is represented by the UK. The whole thing has been reported very differently on the other side of the Atlantic. 3%. We're not big enough to threaten him. We're not big enough to hurt him. And so we have essentially rolled over, but not quite as far as some people were worried we might have to. Where do you stand on the moral or the emotional issue of not kowtowing to a bully, not responding to the mob boss? I love the Danegeld analogy this morning, not paying the Danegeld to the Viking marauder.
If I were in charge, which is why I'm not, I would say go away. Pragmatically, he couldn't say go away, but he could have said, look, can we meet in July? This is great. Thank you very much. We'd love to do this, and we'll tie it up with the state visit or something. He could have tangled it with some things.
Yeah, but the car industry is in a better position as of now. The steel industry is in a better position as of now. These are big wins, even without a signed document.
And if I return to my cynical position,
yes,
he staged the car visit to say, your job, this David Brent, you've got a job, you've got a job, you've got a job. So that was a win for Starmer, undoubtedly, and he couldn't avoid that. I don't believe that standing on a moral principle was even within scope on that, because he has got the jobs back, as it were, for Jaguar Land Rover. But the other thing he could have done is done an even thinner deal. Let's do a tiny little deal, and we'll talk about the rest of it later.
Or a more hurtful deal. I mean, not securing the concessions he's secured on steel and cars. I'd like to know what that deal looks like. Not the one Peter has described, the thinner deal, but the fatter deal, if you like. I mean, we live in a post-truth society, very sadly, so there's nothing to stop various Tories jumping up and down saying, look, we didn't do anything for 14 years, but we could have done, and it would have been way better than what Keir Starmer is doing. And, of course, client journalists will be chiming in to agree. But they don't seem to me today to be doing what they did with the India agreement, which was either deliberately misunderstand it or just lie about what it was going to involve. I just don't know is the short answer, whether or not Keir Starmer had any choice. They clearly see it as a win, but as Peter has reminded us, they would say that, wouldn't they?
Just to go on your point initially about could he have done anything better? I don't think so. I think you're right, the cards were stacked against him from the start. Previous administration hasn't helped with that. There's also a question of leverage. We don't have any anymore. Had we still been part of the European Union, then leverage would certainly have been, something that we could have perhaps lent on. My biggest concern is what happens when eventually, and it will happen at some point, and it looks like it could be sooner rather than later, this administration, this regime, this despotic regime collapses, and you end up with someone like Vance potentially as president, who, for all intents and purposes, could be worse than Trump. And then what happens when we do something that annoys him? Exactly what you said. Does he suddenly decide that, actually, I'm just going to rip up that rule book, I'm going to change it, you've not done something that I liked, I'm going to be petty?
I don't think you need to have a change of personnel for that to be a problem. He could still be in the White House himself and decide that he's going to undo it. I mean, the fact that it hasn't been signed, it's why the first line, look, the markets have responded very positively, but the markets, I think we've all discovered in recent years, are quite excitable. How much legal structure will this deal have? Being the question that Alan Beattie in the FT begins his article with. And the answer is none at all. So it is not really even very binding, but it's still better than nothing, I guess.
And then also what happens with our other partners in the European Union, our other people that we do business with across the world. We've got a deal now, or a supposed deal, with America. How does that now look, and does it play with our other trading partners? Will we be ostracised further by cozying up to the bear, or will people start to think, actually, maybe the UK potentially has something here? I don't know.
No, I guess in a sense the headline writers don't know either, but they've got to have a little bit more certainty, or they have to display a little bit more certainty than you do.
Well, having heard the gist of this so-called trade deal, I think that in the long term, and I can see this with Trump, it's going to be America's get the mine, we get the shaft. Because as Trump is well known for, to put it into basic language that a politician would understand, Welsh on every deal that he's done since he's been in office. Yeah. We've only got to take a look at Canada. I can see this now. Oh, by the way, we want all your data from the NHS. While we're at it, we'd like to get in there.
I mean, I could say that he's going to love you forever and give us everything we ask for. I don't want to get into too much hypothetical or counterfactual. He is not a reliable partner, but he is an incredibly powerful partner, either potentially or actually, and therefore to ignore him and possibly even to enrage him would be foolish. I think if I was Prime Minister, I would have been a bit like Hugh Grant in Love Actually, but that may have been the worst imaginable outcome for the country. It possibly would have been allowing ego to override national interest. I want you to tell me why this isn't in the national interest, confining yourself to facts as opposed to fears.
No, it's not so much fear, it's just going by the form book.
No, that's fine, but it's a fear of the form book.
Yeah, well, anyway, to be perfectly honest, in the national interest, and looking at Keir Starmer, who is basically, he'd do anything he'll let anything happen.
Right.
He has got no principles. He's got no ethics, which for a lawyer is very good, but for a Prime Minister is not good, because you've got to be able to know good from bad.
I'm not hearing any facts yet, Sarah, respectfully.
No, we're getting up to the facts. I'm just explaining him. Thing is, as a Prime Minister, he is supposed to he's got to look out, A, for the national interest, and
which he has done.
In theory.
No, in actuality. I mean, the theory is you saying that he's going to Welsh on the deal and he can't be trusted, and I might agree with you on that, but that's a theory. In reality, what was agreed yesterday sees our steel industry and our car industry relieved of any tariff responsibilities whatsoever. We hope that will stick. Let's just put it that way. Yeah, but there's no point us continuing a conversation that is predicated by the possibility that it won't. We're talking about what has been agreed, not the possible next chapter of that story where what has been agreed gets unagreed. Unless you think that we shouldn't have signed any deal at all with Donald Trump because he can't be trusted, in which case you're coming at it from an entirely different angle. I told you it was nuanced.
Hello, James. Thanks for having me back on again. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about the bin fire that's Trump's brain.
Oh, well, that's a good background, a good context for this conversation then, isn't it?
Well, it is. It links rather well. No, I think you sort of posited the question. So what is wrong? What is it that makes the UK weaker, and what could have been done differently or better? I think the first thing is, yes, of course, we're weaker. We're already a slowing economy. Our GDP is growing at one of the slowest rates, regardless of what anyone says about where we sit in the G7.
Sure.
And of course, without making this a Brexit discussion, we've been massively hampered, a complete cell phone by the whole Brexit deal. But it's because of the Brexit, the EU, that what I think Starmer should have done, and by the way, I do disagree with your immediately previous caller, that I think Starmer may be many things, but I think the guy has got decent morals.
Yeah, I agree with you. He might not have an ideology, as in something that he thinks is more important than the national interest, something that trumps, for want of a better word, the national interest. But no, I thought it was unnecessary to be that personal.
Yeah, I didn't think it was necessary or relevant, really. I think the thing with Starmer is that I just wish the guy was a bit braver. So my view is that you mentioned earlier on in one of the calls that about Trump's capriciousness. That is a double-edged sword, because his capriciousness can also manifest when he's stood up to and he has to back down, and he backs down as often as he goes out there and starts beating his chest. Now, if Starmer, and I'm sure this conversation was had with the likes of Macron and maybe Merz, but Merz is newly sort of positioned on the scene, but they could have done is said, look, let's not any of us go alone into the bear pit that is a US trade deal discussion. Let's actually come together and have a European response, not an EU, a European response.
Like we've done with Ukraine.
Exactly. So, Starmer could save face, not say that he's ratting on the whole Brexit thing, but just say, look, we're doing this for the safety of numbers so that we get a good deal for us that just happens to work for Europe too. And of course, what would be great about that is if it worked, and I would put a 70% likelihood on it does work, it would work, then there is a wonderful precedent to say, now then. Now, what else can we do if we were back where we belonged? So it could deal with them, I think, get a much better deal out of Trump, without a doubt. But
the EU could get a much better deal out of Trump because they've got more on the table, and we would not be part of that because we would not be part of the single market or the customs union.
But in what I'm positing forward here is that we would be part of it. It would be a deal done between the UK and the EU, that the UK is entwined within the EU's trade agreement. We could
negotiate collectively, specifically on tariffs, I suppose, even if we didn't have free movement of goods within our own territory and theirs. So it's a sort of form of collective bargaining.
Yeah, the tariffs would be a start, but I think it could also push itself into releasing some of these sort of stigmas on free trade across the European continent. Because, when good things happen with the discussions with Trump and you start getting some wins, then all of a sudden, there are very different conversations about the freedom of trade within the EU.
Let me run a couple of things by you that have popped up in my inbox. This is from David, who says, if your daughter or son was being bullied and having their lunch money stolen, and they made an agreement to stop the bullying by regularly giving half of their lunch money to the bully, would you congratulate them on a good deal?
No, I would take myself into a corner and give myself a good beating for being a poor father, for allowing them to be in that situation and not going to the school and standing in front of that bully and dealing with him.
This is the danger of analogies, isn't it? Is that you could take them too literally or not literally enough. And Jane picks up a similar theme where she says this tack on accepting Trump's behaviour just doesn't feel right. All bullies return for more. And that brings us back to Danegeld. And Starmer hasn't set any boundaries. He's a bit of a bully as well with regard to purging MPs. But aren't we talking about whether Trump will just come back for more?
Well, around the purging of MPs, I think that's an entirely different conversation.
No, I do too, but I'm going to read it out, aren't I? So it's only fair she sent it to me. But the idea of Trump coming back for more, even as we pay the Dane.
But he will do. But then, as I said earlier, the capriciousness can cut both ways. He'll come back for more. If he beats you into a lifeless pulp, he'll want to keep coming back and having another kick. If you stand up, and if you stand up not as an individual but as a collective, and you say, hey, it's not going to happen that way. I mean, just as Xi will win in the China-US trade war without a doubt. And the EU could win with that same level of solidarity. So he won't come back for more. He's just as likely to step back when he's been attacked back by a proper strong unit.
Well, we've seen that. We've seen that. I mean, in the room actually with Mark Carney,
yes.
and with China, with Xi Jinping, just really crumbling. But I don't know that Starmer is possessed of the heft to have exerted that sort of power on him. I mean, the unique nature of the UK, albeit that we still sit quite high in the size of world economies, the leverage it gives us is negligible compared to Canada's unique trading relationship with the European Union and the sheer size of the Canada's unique trading relationship with the USA and the sheer size of the European Union or China. I'll read you. Thank you for that, Pat. I'll read you the final paragraph.